Hi, everybody. This is Katie Joe, and I am the host of Sovereign Soul. And this podcast is really about being your own sovereign authority of the self, the soul, your own spirituality, of navigating life and asking yourself, what are the questions and what are the answers for me to discern and decode, and versus what has been taught to us versus what is truth for me, and being able to siphon through that and really discern what is real for you and how you want to code and live your life. Today, I want to talk a little bit about addiction. I listened to this amazing woman. I don't remember her name, I don't remember the page, but she's a recovered alcoholic. And she talked about how she's been recovered for many, many years. And she said, it's been so long that people will say to me, it's been so long, you're doing so good. Why don't you have a drink when you're at parties? Couldn't you just have one drink because now you're healed? And she said, the difference between my brain and the difference between someone else's brain is if we go to that party and they have a drink and I have a drink, that person can have a drink and they'll feel satisfied. And I have that drink and it makes me feel ravenous for more. And she said, so kudos to any of those that have been able to do that, that can do that. She said, but for me, that's the difference between an addict's brain and someone who's not an addict. So when we talk about addiction, there's a lot of discussion about disease versus it's not a disease. And I'm not a doctor, I'm not a scientist, so I can't say that I know whether it is or not. I am somebody that has dealt with and navigated addiction for longer than I've been alive, meaning of my almost 50 years, that the majority of it has been navigating an addiction understood as eating disorder. And while people don't necessarily perceive eating disorder as an addiction, it's actually the same neural pathways, it's the same addictive behaviors, it's the same dopamine, it's all of the same factors as addiction. And addiction, to my knowledge, is just a coping strategy for trauma, for pain, for life. So we turn to addiction as a coping method. It is a symptom of the deeper problem. And I know I'm going to do another podcast on eating disorder down the road. I don't want to take too much time in this one, but I just wanted to discuss about addiction. Now, there's other studies that I've seen and read about addiction as I've been studying and watching and witnessing this, and of course, doing my own therapy and going through my own growth, that people who fall into addiction or end up in addiction. And again, like I said, I know that there are genetic and biological factors, and I know that there is a lot of supporting science that this is also a disease. So I'm not discounting that at all. But there's also studies that are coming out that are saying that the greatest thing for addiction is community, is to having a network of positive friendships and things like that that can hold them to that standard. And I want to agree with that. And it's tricky because many of us have, I think everybody nowadays has family members that are family or friends. I think if addiction affects every single one of us in some capacity, whether you're dealing it with yourself or whether you're not. But what I see and what I witness is when I have friends or family that struggles with addiction, part of the name of the game of addiction is really challenging because there's so much deception and harm that happens, especially with chemical addictions, whether it's drugs or whether it's um, alcohol. And I would also extend that to things like gambling or pornography. Like there are some really, really challenging things where as much as I'm explaining that eating disorder is addiction too, and I'm not saying that there's not deception with that, a lot of times these other circumstances involve a lot of lying and a lot of deception because that addiction has taken over. So they are also a really challenging thing for relationships, because as somebody who knows loved ones who have battled addiction, it's hard to be that supportive community that assists them in sobriety, because when they show up in their lack of sobriety, you're usually the one that they hurt. And like, I can use the example of the relationship that I posted about, where he was dealing with alcoholism. And so he wasn't always fully aware after his stints of anger, verbal violence, physically pinning me to the ground. Like, he wouldn't remember, or he wouldn't even realize that he had thrown things, or, and so if I'm in a room and you're throwing things at me and breaking them against the wall, I feel like I'm in danger, and just that volatility of that. And so he didn't have that memory, but I did. And so that affects every single interaction. So when we come to addiction, I think one of the best things we can do is to find a purpose and find an outlet for that. I find that for me, one of the most important things that I can do is to make sure that I'm creating art, to make sure that I'm writing, to make sure that I'm expressing all of these energies that are coming, that I'm aware of, and the chaos that I sometimes feel in my mind. Whether it's meditation or prayer, I use so much sound work. And I don't want to say that I'm doing this from a place of less than, or I can't function in life without any of this. It's just I want to express tools that have assisted me in all of this. And I have amazing people in my life. I have amazing people that support, that encourage me. And to be honest with you, while I have amazing family members, the people that I do rely on for that are usually not family members. They're enough separated from me and from the dynamics that they can have that enough separation that they can come in with that positivity, and there's not as much history. I also am in constant therapy. I'm checking in regularly to keep myself in a place where I can discuss my emotions, where I can discuss my stresses and triggers in an open way without judgment, with somebody who's trained in the skill set to help me move through challenging experiences and emotions and things like that. So as far as addiction's concerned, it's such a complicated issue. And I also see the sides of being somebody who struggles, but then also being the family member or the friend that has these people that are struggling with that on their own. And there's so much love there for them, but there's also preservation. And it's okay to preserve your physical space, your financial space, your home space. It's okay. I know that there's a person that I love that deals with addiction. And so I know that after a certain time of day at night, that if they're calling, they're usually not calling sober. And so I don't answer the phone. That's an okay boundary to have. I've had other people that I loved that are involved in addiction, and they aren't allowed to know my home address, and I'm happy to see them. I'm happy to go out to dinner with them. I'm happy to meet them. I love them, but I'll meet them at a public place. I'll meet them for dinner. I'll meet them somewhere other than my home. And addiction, I feel like, is coming so prevalent in all of our society, and it's coming up in so many ways, and there's no limit to the types of addictions that are out there. And I think that even people who will look down on another person for being alcoholic or a drug addict or whatever they are would be the same person who's addicted to social media, the same person who's addicted to chocolate or coffee. So we all have different levels of what we become attached to. And ultimately, I feel like becoming free from that attachment is learning new coping skills to navigate those inclinations of addictions and attachments, and then also to find a place where we can freely discuss and work through those innermost causes of the symptom being addiction. So if you are somebody that's battling with addiction, and you can find a good therapist or resources, and there's so many YouTube videos out there, there's so many podcasts now, there's so many groups out there that even if you can't afford to go in person to a therapist, there's so many resources out there that you can stay involved with and connect to and find that support system. So, and if you're a family member who has somebody that's involved in addiction, it's absolutely for you okay for you to see them in their best, to acknowledge them in their best, and to hold boundaries, because often those boundaries are the way that they can see themselves outside of that net of addiction.